They said the painting only blinked when lightning struck. No one believed it at first. How could they? Paintings don't move. They remember. If you stand close enough, if you wait for the first roll of thunder, you might see it too. The thin layer of varnish tremble. The brushstroke that catches light differently. The faint suggestion of moisture forming at the corner of an eye that shouldn't exist. The painting hung in the old Museo San Fabian, a colonial mansion turned gallery in the highlands of Guatemala. The year was 1936, the air thick with dust and the scent of ozone that comes before heavy rain. The building sat alone atop a hill, its walls pale and cracked, the roof groaning under years of quiet storms. Every afternoon, the clouds gathered in the same direction, rolling over the valley like slow breath. Inside, the rooms were cool and dry. The guard said the humidity never touched the canvases. But the one in the East Hall, the portrait known simply as La Viuda de Quetzaltenango, never stayed the same for long. No one knew who had painted it. The museum records listed no date, no signature, just a note written in fading ink, gifted anonymously. Frame should not be altered. It was a woman's portrait, seated in shadow. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers laced, a veil falling over her face. Only her eyes were clear, dark, wet, alive. They seemed to glisten differently with each season, as if they absorbed the light from the storms outside. During the dry months, she looked tired. During the rains, she looked awake. And then came the storm of June 4th. The first lightning struck at 5:12 in the afternoon. The guard on duty, a man named Esteban, had just begun to close the shutters when a flash filled the corridor with blue-white fire. For a moment, every painting in the hall reflected it. Every surface, every glass, every eye. But one reflection didn't fade when the light did. He saw her blink. Not a trick of light, not illusion. A slow, deliberate movement of eyelids, the faint sheen of moisture on the lower lash. He froze, breath caught in his chest, watching as the storm rumbled again, and her gaze turned, ever so slightly, toward the window. When he told the curator, they dismissed it as exhaustion. But Esteban knew what he saw. The canvas had moved, not the frame, not the surface, but something behind it. That night, the rain came in sheets, pounding against the shutters until the wood swelled. Lightning flickered through the cracks, flashing silver across the walls. And somewhere inside the East Hall, a sound began. A low, uneven creak, as though something inside the frame was adjusting, stretching against its own dimensions. Esteban returned at dawn to find puddles on the floor beneath the painting. The roof above was dry. He knelt to touch the water. It was warm. From the edges of the frame, tiny streaks of moisture had formed, thin as veins, glistening in the dim light. The air smelled of iron and varnish. He stepped back and looked again at her eyes. The pupils had changed. They were smaller now, as if squinting against the brightness of a storm that had already passed. Have you ever seen something stare back at you and felt, not fear, but recognition? If you had been there that morning, would you have dared to blink first? By the second day, the air inside the museum had changed. The curators blamed the weather. Humidity clung to every surface, the marble floors beading with condensation that glistened under the morning light. But Esteban knew better. The walls didn't just sweat, they breathed. He stood alone in the East Hall before visitors arrived, hands clasped behind his back. The corridor smelled faintly of turpentine and wet linen. The paintings along the walls watched in silence, their varnished faces still and obedient. All except one. La Viuda de Quetzaltenango looked different again. The light from the windows found her face in a way it hadn't before. It seemed to follow her. The shadows in the folds of her veil had deepened, receding into hues of brown that weren't there yesterday. Her eyes, darker than before, now held a reflection that shouldn't have existed. A streak of silver, vertical and sharp, the exact shape of lightning seen from a distance. Esteban stepped closer. The air between him and the canvas felt thick, electric. He could hear faint crackles like cloth rubbed together. A thin line of moisture ran down from the edge of the frame, stopping just before it touched the floor. He wiped it away. The scent that clung to his fingers wasn't water. It was copper. At midday, the curator, Don Ignacio Salazar, called for a meeting. The museum's oldest wing had begun to show structural strain, hairline cracks spreading along the ceiling, doors swelling from the damp. "We'll have to close the east hall until the storm season passes," he said. "The humidity is destroying the art." Esteban's throat tightened. "Sir, it's not the air." Don Ignacio frowned. "Then what?" Esteban hesitated, eyes flicking toward the painting. "She's doing it." The curator laughed softly, though his voice carried unease. "Paintings don't do anything. They decay." But that evening, when Don Ignacio passed the east hall alone to check the shutters, he stopped. He couldn't explain why. He just did. Something in the room's silence drew him. The air was heavy, pressed against his ears. He turned toward the painting, half expecting to see Esteban's imagined trick of light. The woman in the portrait was not looking where she had before. He felt it before he saw it. That slow, unnerving certainty of being watched. Her gaze was no longer cast downward in mourning. It had lifted slightly, toward him. The faintest shift, the subtlest change, but enough to alter everything. He leaned closer, squinting. The varnish shimmered under the flicker of lightning outside, revealing the smallest imperfection, a bead of moisture at the corner of her left eye. It caught the light, bright as glass, before sliding down the painted cheek and vanishing into the brushstrokes below. Don Ignacio stumbled back, his heel scraping against marble. Behind him, thunder rolled again, a deep crawling sound that shook dust from the ceiling. He looked up just in time to see the chandelier sway once, then still. When he looked back at the painting, the tear was gone. He locked the hall for the night. But the guards on duty swore they heard something hours later. A faint rhythmic tapping from inside, spaced evenly, like the sound of rain against glass. Only there was no rain. The night was dry, the air too still for wind. At dawn, Esteban unlocked the doors and froze. The floor beneath the painting was damp again. This time, the puddle was shaped like a hand. He didn't touch it. He just stared. At the water, at the frame, at her. And though her eyes were still turned away, he could swear, in that thin shaft of light slicing through the storm-dark room, that her lips were softer, almost parted. By the third day, the storms refused to leave the highlands. They rolled in from the Pacific like a slow procession, low thunder crawling across the hills, flashes of white crawling through the mist before vanishing into silence. The museum's walls sweated. Books warped in the library, their spines curling like fingers. And in the East Hall, La Viuda de Quetzaltenango had begun to hum. It was almost imperceptible, a faint vibration in the air, too low to be sound. You could feel it if you stood still long enough, in the skin of your arms, in the hollow of your ribs. The room carried it like pressure. Esteban no longer needed to look at the painting to know when she was awake. He could feel it now, a tightening in the air before lightning, a weight just above the lungs. He had stopped telling the others. No one listened. They said the humidity was getting to him, that isolation breeds imagination. But every time thunder rolled through the valley, he found himself drawn back to her. That afternoon, the curator ordered him to remove the portrait to the storage vault. "It's the only piece still absorbing moisture," Don Ignacio said, pacing with his handkerchief pressed to his temple. "It's leaking through the frame. We'll dry it before the varnish peels." Esteban didn't move. "It shouldn't be moved." The curator sighed. "It's a painting, not a relic." Still, when two assistants arrived with gloves and a wooden dolly, they hesitated. The air near the wall was warm, unnaturally so. The varnish shimmered faintly, as if oil floated beneath its surface. One of them reached forward, fingertips grazing the frame, and flinched. "It's vibrating," he said. Don Ignacio frowned and touched it himself. A sharp pulse ran up his wrist. Not heat, not electricity. Something softer but alive, like the beat of a small animal. He withdrew his hand at once, hiding the tremor behind a cough. "Leave it," he said. For now. They left the hall in silence. That evening, Esteban returned alone. The light had gone. The air was heavy with the scent of resin and rain. He lit one lamp, its flame wavering though no wind entered the room. The reflection of its glow danced in her painted eyes, small, amber, alive. He sat on the bench opposite her and waited. Outside, thunder rolled again. The flash came, white, blinding. The sound followed instantly, shaking the floor beneath his feet. For one fraction of a second, every frame in the hall shuddered. The glass of each painting cracked faintly, like ice under weight. Then silence. He stood slowly, approaching her. The lamp behind him guttered out. Only lightning remained, flickering through the shutters in steady intervals. With each flash, her expression changed. Subtly, but he saw it. The tightening of her jaw, the softening of her mouth, and then the blink. Slow, precise. Her eyelids lowered and lifted again, and this time there was no doubt. It wasn't reflection. It wasn't illusion. Her pupils adjusted to the light. He stumbled backward, tripping over the bench. His shoulder struck another frame, sending dust through the air. When he looked back, she was still again. But something new had appeared. In the far right corner of the painting, where the artist had once left shadow, a thin vertical line had emerged. Faint, dark, almost invisible. It hadn't been there before. A seam. Lightning flashed again. The line deepened. It was a crack, but not in the paint, in the world behind it. Through it, for the briefest instant, Esteban saw motion. Not color, not light. Motion. He pressed his ear to the canvas. From inside came the sound of wind. Not the kind that moves through trees, but the kind that moves through a room when the windows are open. Then, faintly, something else. A single word, whispered in a voice like static through water. Escucha! He froze. Thunder exploded above the roof, shaking dust loose from the rafters. When he looked again, the seam was gone. The painting was dry. But when he turned to leave, he noticed a single wet footprint on the marble floor. Small, bare, perfectly formed, leading away from where he had stood, toward the exit. By the next morning, the museum no longer smelled of varnish and stone. It smelled of rain. Fresh rain, even though the windows were sealed and the valley below lay dry. The scent seeped into every hallway, every archive box, until even the plaster of the walls seemed damp to the touch. When Don Ignacio arrived, he found Esteban sitting on the floor of the East Hall, eyes fixed on the portrait. The guard's uniform was damp at the collar, his skin gray from sleeplessness. Around him, the air quivered faintly, like heat above metal. "You stayed here all night?" Esteban nodded. She spoke. The curator's laugh came thin and nervous. "The mind hears what it fears." Esteban didn't look away. "Then why is the floor wet?" Don Ignacio followed his gaze. There were streaks of moisture leading from the base of the frame to the opposite wall. Thin, symmetrical trails that shimmered faintly. Too clean to be ordinary water. He crouched and touched the marble. The liquid was warm again. "Condensation," he said softly, almost convincing himself. "The humidity is only in this room," Esteban interrupted. "Nowhere else." He was right. The corridor beyond the archway was bone dry. The threshold of the East Hall felt like crossing between climates. Cool and arid to the left, dense and wet to the right. A single line of demarcation ran through the air, visible only by how it bent the light. Don Ignacio straightened his tie, unease crawling into his voice. "Close the shutters," he said. "We'll bring her to storage tomorrow." But the sky had other plans. At noon, the storm returned. Not outside, but inside. The light dimmed. Pressure built. The faint crack of static sounded above the ceiling beams, followed by a tremor that rippled through the glass in the frames. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the windows, though none were open, and then the sound came again. At first, it was a hum, low, steady, filling the space between heartbeats. Then it grew, resolving into rhythm. Not thunder, not wind, breathing. The portrait shifted. The veil that covered the woman's face fluttered, as if caught by a faint gust. The folds deepened, catching shadow where none should fall. Her hands, once painted in repose, appeared subtly altered, fingers no longer interlaced, but separated, relaxed, as though resting between movements. Don Ignacio took a step back. "What is this?" Esteban didn't answer. His eyes were wide, fixed on the canvas. He could see moisture forming again, not on the frame this time, but beneath the surface, trapped between pigment and varnish like condensation between panes of glass. It gathered in droplets, rolling downward before fading back into the paint. Then came the whisper again, clearer now, layered over the hum. "Escucha, mi oyes." The curator clutched his chest, the words crawling through his bones like vibration. The sound wasn't in the air. It was in them. Outside, the first real thunderclap of the afternoon struck, a shock that rattled every window pane in the building. For one suspended moment, light filled the hall. When it faded, Esteban saw something new. The painting had changed again. The background, once dark and simple, was no longer flat. Depth had entered it, faint at first, then undeniable. Behind the seated woman, the outline of a window had appeared, open to a painted storm. Rain streaked down the canvas within the canvas, rendered with impossible texture, each drop alive with movement. But the detail that froze him wasn't the window. It was the figure outside it. A faint silhouette, standing in the distance, turned away, its form blurred as though viewed through water. Don Ignacio fell to his knees, muttering prayers under his breath. Esteban couldn't move. He was watching the woman's painted eyes again, waiting for the blink. It came just as thunder rolled across the valley. One smooth, deliberate movement, accompanied by the faintest sound of wet fabric being pulled apart. The glass covering the frame fogged instantly. When he wiped it clean, the painted storm was gone. The woman now looked directly at him. Her mouth had changed shape again. It was open. The fifth night began with silence. Not peace, silence. The kind that presses against the ribs and makes even thought sound loud. The storm had been building for hours. You could feel it in the marrow, that metallic tension before the world splits. The lamps in the museum flickered one by one, each dying with a faint hiss. Only the east hall remained lit, its single bulb humming with weak yellow light. Esteban sat in the center of the room, soaked in sweat though the air was cool. Don Ignacio had locked the doors to keep others out. Yet somehow the smell of rain lingered inside, not fresh, but old, like stone wet for centuries. The painting loomed above him, larger than he remembered, or perhaps the walls had shrunk around it. The woman's face was clearer now. Her veil had thinned to gauze, her expression emerging fully for the first time. She wasn't old, she wasn't young, she was present. Every detail breathed, the pores on her skin, the faint sheen along her cheek, the reflection of the storm that hadn't yet begun. Her eyes shone darker than before, not black but deep brown, streaked with light that seemed to move. A low hum filled the hall again, deeper now, closer to vibration than sound. It pulsed through the floor, through Esteban's chest, matching the rhythm of his heart. Escucha. He froze. The voice wasn't coming from the air this time. It came from inside the frame. Lightning struck somewhere outside. A jagged, bone-white flash that flooded the hall through the cracks of the shutters. The painting lit up. For a moment, the entire wall glowed. The woman's eyes reflected the lightning perfectly. Not painted reflection, not illusion, but light, real light, caught in her pupils and released a fraction later. And then, for the first time, she moved. Not the subtle shift of shadow or paint, but movement. Her head turned, slightly. Just enough to break the impossible stillness of art. The fabric of her veil swayed, the edges catching on invisible air. Esteban stumbled backward, his breath catching on something heavier than fear. He could hear her breathing now, soft, steady, just behind the canvas. The frame itself seemed to inhale, the corners creaking, the nails groaning as if pulled from within. Thunder boomed again, so close it rattled the marble floor. The vibration ran through his feet and up his spine. The lights went out. For a few seconds, darkness reigned. Then came a faint flicker. Not from the ceiling, but from the paint. The woman's form shimmered, every brushstroke alive with phosphorescent vein. Her body blurred, as if dissolving into the surface of the storm behind her. And when she spoke again, it wasn't a whisper. It was a breath, warm, wet, human. It filled the room like fog. Mírame. Esteban obeyed. The air folded inward, pulling everything toward the canvas. The temperature dropped. His lantern flame stretched thin, then imploded, sucked toward the frame as if gravity itself had bent. The moisture on the walls ran upward. The room began to hum with a pitch so low it felt like bone splintering. The painting was no longer flat. The depth inside it had grown, not illusion, but space. Behind the woman, the storm was alive now. Lightning flickered through painted clouds, casting light that escaped onto the marble floor. The sound of rain filled the hall. Not from the roof, but from within the painting, steady and constant. Don Ignacio pushed through the doors, shouting his name. He froze at the sight, the portrait glowing, the walls bending inward like fabric drawn by wind. The air smelled of ozone and salt. "Esteban!" The guard didn't move. His eyes were locked on hers. The woman blinked again, slowly. Her pupils constricted in the next flash of lightning, and a drop of water, no, a tear, fell from the bottom edge of the frame, hitting the floor with the sound of rain. The curator's hand trembled as he reached for the painting. "What have you done?" Esteban whispered, voice breaking. "She's looking for him." The curator frowned. "Who?" "The man outside her window." Another flash, bright, blinding, and the world split open. The glass shattered outward, spraying fragments across the hall. Wind tore through the room, though every door was closed. The sound of thunder became continuous, a rolling pressure that filled their heads and drowned thought. And then, silence again. When the air cleared, the painting was different. The chair was empty. The woman was gone. The background remained. The storm, the open window, the faint reflection of a lightning. But in the glass of the broken frame, both men could see themselves reflected. Not side by side, but standing inside the painted room, behind the window, gazing outward into the hall. Their reflections blinked. For several seconds after the flash, neither of them moved. The storm outside had gone quiet, but the air inside the East Hall still trembled, a vibration that made the floor hum like a struck string. The scent of ozone hung thick, metallic, and sweet, laced with the faint smell of wet fabric and old oil paint. The painting was empty. The chair still stood at its center, the folds of the veil painted in exquisite detail upon its seat. But the figure, the widow, was gone. The brushwork behind her shimmered faintly, as if the pigment was still wet. Don Ignacio took a step forward. His reflection followed, a fraction late, moving within the glass of the shattered frame. "It's impossible," he murmured. "This is impossible." Esteban said nothing. He was staring at the puddle forming beneath the frame. The droplets fell slowly, rhythmically, not from rain or condensation, but from within the painting itself. Each drop struck the marble and hissed faintly, evaporating on contact. He knelt beside it, his fingertips hovering over the liquid. The surface tension rippled toward him, as if responding to presence. He withdrew his hand. The curator circled the frame. From the side, it was wrong, impossibly deep, the shadow behind the canvas extending farther than the wall should allow. The paint itself seemed to move. Faint swirls beneath the varnish catching the dim light like currents in dark water. Lightning flickered outside again. The reflection hit the wall behind the painting, but the wall no longer reflected the room. It reflected the storm. Thunder rumbled, muffled, as though heard through thick glass. The men turned toward the nearest window. It was dry. No rain, no wind. The sound came entirely from the painting. Then came the whisper again, closer than ever. "Mírame!" The voice wasn't one. It was layered. A dozen versions of the same tone, overlapping, some low, some high, all breathing together. The glass fragments on the floor vibrated in sympathy, rattling softly. Esteban clutched his chest, his heartbeat no longer his own. It followed the rhythm of the voice, steady, heavy, measured. Don Ignacio backed away. "It's not a painting anymore," he said. "It's a door." The light dimmed as though the room itself agreed. From within the frame, movement returned. The space that had been empty deepened further, shadows forming shapes that refused to hold. The chair creaked. An actual sound, wood straining under invisible weight. Then, the sound of footsteps. Soft, deliberate, pacing somewhere behind the canvas. Both men froze. Another flash illuminated the hall, and for an instant, the painted room within the frame was perfectly clear. A hand rested on the back of the chair, pale, wet, trembling. It withdrew the moment the thunder rolled. The curator stumbled backward, his boot slipping on the wet marble. "Close it," he gasped. "Seal it, for God's sake." Esteban didn't move. His eyes were locked on the surface. His breathing had matched the rhythm of the storm again. "She's not gone," he whispered. "She's crossing." The air grew heavier, pressing downward until every exhale sounded like a sob. The sound of wind inside the painting intensified. swirling faster. The curtains in the painted background blew inward, their folds moving in impossible silence. And then another figure appeared, not the widow, taller, male, standing at the painted window, his face turned toward the unseen horizon. Lightning revealed him fully for a heartbeat. Soaked hair, formal coat, a presence too solid to be pigment. Then came a sound, faint, metallic, the unmistakable echo of nails loosening. The corners of the frame shifted. The painting leaned forward, just enough for air to escape behind it, carrying with it the scent of rain and earth. Don Ignacio shouted for help, but his voice died in the pressure. The sound went nowhere. The crack that had once divided the painting's corner widened again. From within, light seeped, soft, white, cold. It spread across the marble like spilled mercury. The curator tried to run. He made it 3 steps before the light reached him. He froze mid-motion, his body trembling, eyes wide as the reflection of the storm filled his pupils. His mouth opened to scream, but no sound came. His reflection inside the frame mirrored him perfectly, then blinked. A sound like fabric tearing filled the room, followed by the smell of ozone and wet copper. The air went still again. When Esteban turned back toward the painting, Don Ignacio was gone. Only his hat remained on the floor, soaked through, lying in a perfect circle of dry marble. Inside the frame, 2 figures now stood at the painted window. One veiled, one bareheaded, both looking outward into a storm that no longer existed. The next bolt of lightning struck somewhere beyond the valley, too far to hear. Yet the entire museum shuddered as if something beneath its foundation had moved. The lights flickered once, then failed, and in the absolute darkness that followed, Esteban heard it again. Not a whisper this time, but breath against his ear. "Ahora, mírame tú." He turned. The eyes staring back at him weren't painted anymore. By dawn, the storm had passed over the valley, but the museum did not dry. The air inside the East Hall remained heavy, damp, charged. Every window was beaded with moisture from the inside, and the floor beneath La Viuda de Quetzaltenango glistened under the thin gray light that seeped through the shutters. The janitors refused to enter. They said the room sounded wrong, that every footstep echoed twice. The curator's office door remained locked. When the staff forced it open, they found his desk untouched, his keys on the blotter, his papers weighed down by a single damp handprint. The handprint was reversed, the thumb on the wrong side. By noon, officials from the city arrived. They brought a photographer, a technician, a priest. The camera refused to focus on the painting. The glass of the lens fogged instantly each time it faced the frame. The technician cursed and cleaned it again and again, but every photograph came back the same. The portrait's outline blurred, the center consumed by light. The priest sprinkled holy water and whispered blessings until his voice cracked. The droplets hung in the air like dust, refusing to fall. He left without speaking, crossing himself twice before the door. No one mentioned the puddle on the marble. It hadn't evaporated. Esteban stayed behind when the others left. He couldn't explain why, only that the air outside the room felt too thin, too ordinary. He stood before the painting again, alone, listening. The silence was worse now. The absence of sound felt alive, like something holding its breath. The smell of rain had grown faintly sweet, almost floral. He reached toward the frame. The wood was cold now, the vibration gone, but the depth inside the painting had not receded. The chair remained, the 2 figures standing at the painted window, still lifelike, captured mid-turn. Only the light was different. The storm behind them had calmed. The sky above the painted hills was pale and clean. He leaned closer. There was something wrong with the woman's face. The detail was perfect. The skin tone, the curve of her jaw. But the eyes, they were not the same as before. The color was lighter now, a soft brown he recognized. His own. He stumbled backward, his heel sliding through the puddle. The water rippled outward, reaching toward the base of the frame. And then the room exhaled. Every door in the corridor opened at once, their hinges groaning like lungs expanding. The temperature dropped, then rose again sharply. The smell of ozone returned. Esteban's breath clouded in the air. Lightning flashed. not from the sky, but from the walls themselves. A single pulse of white that illuminated everything. For an instant, the shadows of people filled the room. Dozens of silhouettes, faint and translucent, standing shoulder to shoulder behind him. When he turned, there was no one there. The light flickered once more. Inside the painting, the scene had changed again. The window was open now. Rain streaked across the painted glass, the folds of the woman's veil fluttering as if caught by wind. The two figures remained, but their positions had shifted. The man now sat in the chair. The woman stood behind him, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. Both looked directly outward, at him. He could see detail now. Too much detail. The pores, the faint stubble on the man's chin, the reflection of the gallery's shutters in their eyes. The level of realism was impossible for oil paint. The surface of the canvas seemed to pulse faintly, like skin beneath breath. And then he noticed the smallest thing, a single droplet at the edge of the frame, forming slowly, impossibly. This one didn't fall. It clung there, trembling, as if resisting gravity. When he looked closer, he saw movement inside it, a reflection, tiny and inverted, of himself staring upward from the marble floor. The droplet quivered once, then broke, but instead of falling, it slid upward. The puddle at his feet began to move. Its surface flattened, shimmered, and rose. Thin strands of water lifting toward the frame, drawn into the wood grain, disappearing without sound. The air felt thinner now, drier, lighter, as though the storm's breath were being reclaimed. Esteban took one step back. His reflection inside the glass followed. Half a second too late. The storm outside the building reignited without warning. A single bolt struck somewhere beyond the hills, white enough to erase shadow. The painting glowed, the surface trembling with life. And for one unbearable second, he saw all three of them inside. The woman, the man, and himself, reflected together in the window of the painted room, all turning their heads toward the same flash. Then the light faded. The hall was empty again. Only the sound of dripping remained, slow, deliberate, echoing from somewhere deep within the canvas. For days after the storm, the museum refused to dry. The air held its dampness like memory, trapped, unmoving, patient. The east hall was sealed, yet puddles kept forming along the baseboards, even when the windows were shut and the walls tested sound. The staff began to avoid the wing entirely. Doors swelled shut, their hinges blackened with moisture. The scent of rain lingered in the corridor, faintly sweet, almost comforting, like petrichor clinging to marble. The janitors whispered that the humidity was breathing. The curator's disappearance spread through the city as rumor. Some said he'd fled to the coast after an accident. Others claimed he'd drowned, though there were no rivers near the museum. Only Esteban knew better, and he said nothing. He remained on duty, though no one asked him to. He patrolled the darkened halls at night, lantern in hand, listening for the quiet rhythm that had once haunted him. It came sometimes, soft and steady, like heartbeats muffled by fabric. Each night he returned to the East Hall. Each night the painting changed a little more. The storm inside it had ended. The light there was different now, clear, warm, golden, like afternoon sun after rain. The two figures remained, seated together near the painted window, their faces turned outward. They looked peaceful, and for the first time, they smiled. The sight unnerved him more than any movement before. The serenity was wrong, too still, too complete. The kind of stillness that feels like the breath after a long exhale, the instant before something collapses. He noticed new details too. The edges of the frame had darkened, as though soaked from behind. The paint at the bottom seemed fresher, the colors more vivid. He leaned closer. The scent rising from it was unmistakable. Linseed oil mixed with the faint copper tang of blood. The brushwork was perfect, too perfect. Each stroke thinner, sharper, like the work of an artist seeing their subject from memory rather than imagination. And then he realized what had changed most of all: the woman's hands. They rested now in her lap again, fingers interlaced. But their position was familiar, his familiar. The small scar on the knuckle, the faint swelling near the thumb where his lantern had once burned him. The hands on the canvas were his, He stepped backward slowly. His shadow stretched across the marble, long and thin. From within the painting, the light shifted, subtle at first, then deliberate, as though the sun in that world were moving. Dust motes swirled in the painted air, crossing between dimensions like pollen caught in wind. And then he saw it, a movement at the edge of the painted window. A curtain drew itself aside, revealing a view of the same valley where the museum stood. The same clouds, the same color of dusk. Only the building was missing. Instead, in its place, was another structure. Smaller, older, its walls weathered but intact. Hanging inside its single window was a painting. He blinked. The reflection blinked back. Esteban staggered, reaching for the wall, his palm pressing against cold marble. Beneath his skin, the vibration returned. Faint, rhythmic, alive. The same pulse that once filled the air of the East Hall, now coming from the stone itself. He raised his lantern. The light trembled. Every painting in the hall had begun to sweat. Droplets formed along their frames, collecting at the edges, rolling downward like tears. The air thickened with the scent of oil and rain. And then, all at once, the lights in the museum flared. The glow came not from the ceiling lamps, but from within the canvases. Every painting, every frame, every surface that had ever held pigment began to shimmer, faintly translucent, as though something behind them had been waiting for light. The portraits blinked, one by one. Across the halls, across decades of art and silence, eyes that had stared still for generations stirred awake under the storm's returning pulse. Each blink was slow, patient, synchronized with the roll of distant thunder. Esteban dropped the lantern. It shattered, flames licking across the wet marble before dying in smoke. The glow from the paintings filled the absence, a warm, impossible illumination that revealed dust suspended midair like stars beneath water. The storm had returned, but not outside. It was inside the museum, inside the paint, inside him. He looked once more toward La Viuda de Quetzaltenango. The figures were gone. The chair was empty again. But on the marble floor beneath the frame, a perfect reflection shimmered. Not painted, not solid, a mirror of water forming slowly out of the damp. And in that reflection, he saw himself seated, hands folded, face calm, eyes closed. A soft breath escaped the air. And from somewhere within the reflection, the woman's voice returned, distant and tender. Ahora, descansa tú. The reflection smiled and blinked. Weeks passed before anyone reopened the East Hall. By then, the museum had emptied itself. The humidity receded, the floors dried, and silence returned. Not natural silence, but something polished and deliberate, like a surface wiped clean of fingerprints. The staff who came back noticed small differences. The color of the walls seemed lighter. The smell of varnish was gone, and where the portrait once hung, there remained only a faint rectangular shadow, as if light itself had forgotten how to touch that space. No one spoke of the storm anymore. They said Esteban had resigned, that he left for the coast to join the salvage boats, that he tired of silence and marble and wanted the salt air instead. It was easier that way. It was cleaner than saying he'd simply vanished between breaths. But the janitors knew the truth, or a version of it. At night, when the museum slept and the rain whispered against the tiles, they sometimes saw light where none should be. A single shimmer along the far wall, like reflection through water. And within that light, for an instant, the outline of a chair. Then nothing. Over time, the East Hall grew colder. The tiles underfoot carried a faint pulse, a heartbeat so subtle it could be mistaken for the vibration of passing thunder. The paintings in other wings began to change imperceptibly. Colors deeper, eyes clearer, shadows alive with impossible precision. It wasn't decay. It was evolution. The art began to remember itself. One afternoon, years later, a new curator arrived. She walked the silent galleries, cataloging what time had done. When she reached the East Hall, the air felt different. Still, but not empty. The smell of distant rain hung faintly in her throat. The wall where the widow's portrait had once hung was smooth now, unblemished. But as she brushed dust from its surface, her hand met resistance. A fine grain, softer than stone, warm to the touch. Under the light, something faint appeared, brush strokes. Not many, just enough to form the curve of a shoulder, the suggestion of a veil, the ghost of a gaze. She leaned closer, and the light shifted. The pigment darkened, taking shape under her shadow. A woman's face began to emerge, half-formed, eyes closed as if resting. The curator blinked. The face vanished. She stepped back. The wall was bare again. From somewhere deep within the building came a distant creak, like a frame adjusting, a hinge remembering movement. Rain began to fall outside. The curator smiled to herself, unaware of why her reflection in the nearby glass smiled half a second later. That night, lightning crawled once more through the Guatemalan sky, silent and far away. The storm rolled slow, patient, as though retracing old ground. And for those who passed near the museum's windows, a faint glow could be seen through the rain, pale, golden, rhythmic, like breath beneath canvas. Some swore they heard a voice carried by the wind, soft and steady, whispering the same word over and over. Escucha. It wasn't warning. It wasn't prayer. It was invitation. Today, the Museo San Fabian no longer stands. The hillside where it once rested is a quiet field now, its foundation smoothed by moss and rain. The locals say the storm of 1942 took it. A lightning strike that set the roof ablaze, burning until nothing remained but stone and the faint perfume of varnish. No official record confirms it, but that's how they tell it. Fire during rain, smoke without heat. The path leading there is still visible if you know where to look. It curves through the undergrowth, ending at a clearing where the air feels heavy, as though the sky stoops lower to listen. Sometimes, when clouds gather above the mountains, the first wind carries a strange scent. Old linen, turpentine, rain trapped in marble. If you walk far enough into that stillness, you might feel the ground hum beneath your feet. Not loudly, just a pulse, deep and patient, like the sound of a museum remembering the rhythm of footsteps long gone. And sometimes, just before the storm breaks, you'll find what the locals call La Sombra Blanca, the white shadow. A faint glow at eye level, rectangular, trembling like a reflection on water. It appears only when lightning flickers far away, lighting the horizon for the briefest instant. Those who have seen it say there's always a face within that glow. Never the same face twice. Some say it's Esteban, still guarding his post, eyes calm, mouth closed, waiting for the next flash. Others claim it's the widow herself, her veil drawn back, her gaze lifted toward the mountains. But those who've stayed long enough, those who dared to stare when the thunder rolled, say the light doesn't hold just one face. It holds theirs too. The glow flares once more, mirroring the storm's breath, and for a heartbeat, the field feels like a gallery again. The air cool, the floor marble, the scent of rain still trapped in oil and canvas. And then it fades, the light slipping back into the clouds. But if you listen closely, the sound remains. A faint, steady tapping, spaced evenly apart. Not rain, not wind. The sound of brush against canvas, slow and patient, painting something no one will ever see finished. The storm will come again. It always does. And when it does, somewhere in that valley, under the rhythm of thunder and the heartbeat of rain, the widow will open her eyes once more. Only this time, she won't be looking at the storm. She'll be looking at you,